right, so we are moving into the final group of plants that we are going to talk about here, and this is the Angiosperms, otherwise known as the flowering plants. They first appeared about 135 million years ago, and today they are the most abundant organisms in the plant kingdom. And here's just a few examples. Let me hide this real quick of what those can look like. We have some orchids. This looks like a cone flower. This looks like a bunch of different kinds of orchids and lilies. There's just so many different types of flowering plants out there. They're all angiosperms. They have very unique reproductive organs. So angiosperm actually means enclosed seep. So the flowers contain ovaries which surround and protect these seeds. And after fertilization, the ovaries develop into fruits. So the whole seed is very enclosed, it's very protected. Now these fruit or the seeds, they can be dispersed in a variety of different ways. The most common way, or the easiest way, I guess, maybe not most common necessarily, is going to be by wind. So there are adaptations that these seeds have that will help with that wind dispersal. For example, the samara of a maple has curved wings that cause the fruit to spin as it's released from the tree. And if it gets caught by the wind, it will move ever so slightly. You guys probably have seen these before actually outside. I remember as a child, I used to run around and pick them up and try to make them spin. We called them helicopters. And dandelion seeds have little plumes, and that allows the seed to be carried away by the wind as well. And these little plumes, you can see up at the top here, it's like this little fuzz. And at the bottom, you can see the seed itself. We can also disperse seeds by animals. So birds and mammals and even ants can all act as disseminating agents, which are just carriers of the seeds. Some seeds are going to adhere to the feet of the animal, while others are designed to be eaten. And then whenever that animal goes to the bathroom, they will be releasing that seed wherever it is. And those types of seeds generally like to be carried farther away. So here you can see this little bird here. He's eating a berry. Eventually he'll poop and the berry will begin to grow as long as the conditions are good. This dog here, he has burrs in his hair. And I remember as a child, I used to go sled riding with my one friend, Cassie, and little kids, they get crazy ideas. So we went down the first hill, and if you crossed over her driveway, there was a bigger drop off. And we were like, oh, that'll be more fun. So we created a path so that we could go from the top hill over her driveway and down to the bottom hill. Well, she went first, and there was a burr bush at the bottom of that hill. And when she came up, she had nice long hair. Her hair was matted in burrs, and her mother was so mad. It took quite some time to get the burrs out of her hair, but luckily she did not have to cut it. The next way we can disperse seeds is by water, and those are really the three main ways. It's air, by animal, or by water. Some fruits contain trapped air that allows them to float to new locations, and so I have a lotus flower here. A while back on social media, there were these posts, and people kept on making lotus flowers into their skin, and they were saying that all these crazy diseases were going around, and at the time, none of it was true. It was just really good Photoshop. And coconuts also. You can see a coconut here. They're designed to float, and eventually they will begin to grow whenever the conditions are right. I do have a video that I show in class on seeds, and I will post that link separately. This is the general makeup of a seed. So the outer layer is called the seed coat. Then you have the plumule, the hypocotyl radical axis. There's this little guy right here. A hilum, micropyle, and the cotyledon is all this stuff here. And we'll go into what each one of those things are in a little bit more detail. So this is just a common garden bean, and you see it going from just a seed to where it eventually is going to pop a root, and then it's going to start to open up, and you're going to have some seed leaves, we call them. Those are the very first leaves that a plant gets. So the structure of a seed It has a concave side of an kind of looks like a kidney bean, has a small white scar above the hilum. Once this bean is placed into water, it's going to swell up and it's going to split the seed coat, revealing two halves called cotyledons. Cotyledons are food storage organs that function as seed leaves. The plumule is an embryo shoot, so it's just a baby plant. The epicotyl is a stem located above the cotyledon. The hypocotyl is a stem located below the cotyledon. And the tip of the stem will develop into the radicle. The plumule and the radicle are both enclosed in tubular sheathing structures called, and I'm really bad at pronouncing a lot of these words, the colpidal and the chloriza. These protect the delicate tissues with the seeds as it germinates. Advantages of having flowers. So it's kind of nice for the angiosperms because they're different from the gymnosperms in that they can attract animal pollinators like a lot easier because they have pretty colors, or maybe they have a certain scent that they give off, or maybe it's just the shape of the flower. They can attract it. Whereas, a gymnosperm doesn't really have that ability. Pollination by animals is much more efficient than pollination by wind is as well. So it's nice for those angiosperms, whereas the gymnosperms, they're just kind of stuck at the mercy of the wind and the rain and all of that. Flower structure. So with having a flower comes a lot of responsibility on these plants. They all share certain basic features, such as a peduncle, which is an area of the stalk that develops into the bud, and the receptacle, which is a swelling at the tip of the peduncle. Whorls are going to be other parts of the flower that are attached to the receptacle. And as we move on in here, all about the flowers. We have the sepal, which is the outermost whorl. It's usually green and leaf-like. Petals, also known as the corolla, they attract the pollinators and can be individual or they can be fused together, and that is going to go into all the taxonomy of how things are named. A stamen is going to be attached to the receptacle around the base of the pistil in the center of the flower, and it consists of two parts. It consists of a male part, which is called the filament, and it supports the anther. The anther is going to hold the pollen grains, and it consists of a pistil, which is a vase-shaped area, consists of three regions that merge with one another. This is the female part. It makes up the stigma, the style, and the ovary, which is the part that develops into the fruit. This is what it looks like, all those crazy terms that I just was spitting out at you here. So this part here, that's going to be the female part. This is going to be the male part, the anthers and the filament. The anthers are at the top, the filament is what holds it up. And this is where your pollen is going to be located. Now, if you notice, the stigma has a pollen tube. Not all flowers have pollen tubes, but this particular one does. It looks like it's some type of a lily maybe. So it's a little bit taller than its anthers because it is hoping to get pollinated by a different flower. It could go through self-pollination, but generally flowers want a little bit more diversity, so their goal is to get pollinated by a separate plant. Advantages of having fruits. Fruit are going to contain more than one seed, normally, but some do just contain one seed individually. They play an important role in spreading seeds by allowing them to be eaten and then spread over a very large area. Or maybe they are going to be attaching themselves to the animal and being carried away. Regardless, they can move pretty far pretty quick. In 1893, the U.S. Supreme Court, in the case of Nix versus Heaton, they ruled that a tomato was legally a vegetable rather than a fruit. And I threw this in there because I thought it was pretty interesting. You might be wondering, why would I say that a tomato is a fruit in the first place? And if you actually look at the definition of a fruit is anything that contains seeds. Tomatoes contain seeds. So a lot of the things that you probably think are vegetables are actually fruits. Cucumbers, zucchinis, anything that has a seed in it is actually technically a fruit. And they always, people argue with each other over tomatoes. So legally they say it's a vegetable. Technically, if you go by definition, it's actually a fruit. Vegetables consist of leaves, the leaf petioles, stems, roots, flower buds, and other parts of the plant, anything that is not seed. So lettuce, those are leaves. That is going to be a vegetable. Cabbage is a vegetable. What else would be a vegetable? Any type of a root, like a potato. Those are vegetables. All fruits develop from flower ovaries and are found exclusively in the flowering plants. Fertilization usually indirectly determines whether or not the ovary will develop into a fruit. Pollen grains contain specific stimulants that may initiate fruit development. So if it doesn't get fertilized, you're not going to get a fruit from it. So here's a few more examples of fruit versus vegetable. I have cucumbers up here, which would be, we're going to go with the technical definition, that's a fruit. Plums are fruits, they have seeds. This is some type of romaine lettuce maybe, that is going to be a vegetable. Pumpkin has seeds, so that is a fruit. Zucchinis have seeds, so that is a fruit. This looks like a cabbage, I believe, that is also a vegetable. This up here is going to be a vegetable because it has a root on it. The beans have seeds, so that is going to be a fruit. Artichoke, I'll be honest with you, I've never eaten an artichoke. Looking at it, it looks like it should be considered a vegetable, but if you've eaten an artichoke and if there's seeds in there, then it is a fruit. There are different regions of fruits. Mature fruit has 3. The skin forms the exocarp, exo means outer, while the inner boundary around the seed is going to be called the endocarp. Endo means, inner. So the endocarp can be either hard and stony like a peach or papery like an apple. Mesocarp is the fleshy tissue between the endo and exocarps, and that's pretty much what you eat. These 3 regions are collectively known as the pericarp. So this is going to be a peach. I have my seed on the inside here. The endocarp is this hard bit that surrounds the seed. The mesocarp is the flesh, and the exocarp is that furry skin that some people just can't stand the feel of. Fleshy fruits. Simple fleshy fruits develop from a flower with a single pistil. A drupe is a simple fleshy fruit with a single seed enclosed by a hard, stony endocarp or a pit, something like a coconut or an almond. Berries develop from compound ovaries containing more than one seed. True berries are fruits with thin skin and a pericarp that is relatively soft at maturity. So these are things like grapes, tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants. Some fruits include the word berry in their common name, so we get back into the bits of common names and taxidermy, but they're not actually berries at all, like strawberries, raspberries, and blackberries technically are not berries. I'm probably blowing your mind right now with all this stuff. Yeah, an eggplant is a berry, and a grape is a berry, or a pepper is a berry, but a strawberry is not a berry. Imagine that. Dry fruits are fruit whose mesocarp is definitely dry at maturity. They're distinguished by the way they split, so a follicle is going to split along one side or seam. A legume splits along 2 sides or 2 seams, so these are your beans and your peanuts. Siliques split along 2 sides or seams, but the seeds are borne on a central partition which is exposed when the 2 halves of the fruit separate. And this is mainly produced by the mustard family, things like broccoli and cabbage. Capsules split in a variety of ways, like a Brazil nut. Nuts. The next part, it's a one-seeded fruit that generally have a pericarp that is much harder and thicker, such as an acorn or a hazelnut. So aggregate fruits. I told you before that blackberries were not actually berries. So what are they? They're actually called aggregate fruits. They are derived from a single flower with several to many pistils. Each pistil is going to develop into tiny drupes. So each one of these little guys here is called a drupe or a fruitlet, which is kind of a cute name. And as they mature, they're going to cluster into one unit, which you consider a blackberry. So each one of these little individual guys here was its own little pistil, and it became a fruit. Multiple fruits are derived from several to many individual flowers in a single inflorescence. An inflorescence is a group of several to hundreds of flowers that all open at the same time. Each flower has its own receptacle, but as the flowers mature separately into fruitlets, they develop together into a single larger fruit like a pineapple. And you can kind of see a pineapple is sectioned off here on its skin. Angiosperms are extremely diverse if you haven't gotten the gist of that yet. There is a lot of different branches to angiosperms. The size is going to range from something smaller than your fingernail to a tree, like a giant oak tree. We describe them by the structure of their stems or the length of their life or even the number of their seed leaves. Woody and herbaceous plants, so that's one group. We describe the stem. Woody plants are like your trees and shrubs. They have stems that are hard and they live from year to year. So that would be something like this, meaning that it doesn't actually die off in the winter. Herbaceous plants do not form wood as they grow, things like dandelions, sunflowers, petunias. I know sunflower stems tend to look really rugged, but normally they're green. Their stems are softer than the stems of the woody plants, so they are going to die off year to year. They don't go dormant, they actually die. Annuals, biennials, and perennials. These are all different types of plants, and it describes when they come back, or if they come back. So annuals are plants that complete their whole life cycle in one season, ending with the death of the parent plant. Biennials take 2 growing seasons to complete the cycle, and then they die off. Perennials take several growing seasons to go from a germinated seed to a plant producing new seeds. These guys that I have pictured down here at the bottom are both perennials. This is a hosta plant, and it will come back year to year, and these are cone flowers, which will also come back year to year. Personally, I really enjoy flower gardens or just plant gardens because not all of my plants have flowers on them. And I'm a big fan of perennials because once I plant something in the ground, I don't have to tend to it year after year. Except for roses. Rose bushes will probably be the death of me one day because I get very obsessive about my rose bushes. My uncle is a landscaper, and he came in and he did the landscaping for my house, and he put 2 rose bushes in there. And I thought they were so pretty the first season I had them. They were nice, short, little petite things. They probably came up to about knee height. Rose bushes need a lot of care. I didn't realize this whenever I was gifted these rose bushes. They get attacked by beetles regularly, multiple times actually. So you have to spray them and dust them. And then comes the deadheading part of it, where every time you get a dead flower, a dead rose, if you cut the bud off of that rose, not the entire stem, just cut the bud off, it will bud again. It'll bloom again. It'll be beautiful. My roses bloom from the minute that they pop up in the ground, from about May, all the way through, let's see, I had blooms in October this year for Halloween. As long as it hasn't frosted, they will continue to bloom. So that's the part where I get obsessed with continuously looking at my roses every single day through the summer with my little snippers, and I go out there and I have to snip all the dead flowers off. If I see a dead flower, it has to be snipped within 24 hours. Does it really have to be snipped within 24 hours? No. I could leave the dead flowers on there, but then my roses aren't going to bloom, and thus the cycle is just vicious and repeating over and over again of me cutting down my dead roses. Now my rose bushes are gigantic. They are probably around 4 feet tall at this point. They have some very thick stems. They've been alive for, this is going to be their 4th year coming up. And I see no end in sight for them, which I'm happy about, but I'm also a little irritated in part because they take so much of my time with the fertilization and the insecticide and then the deadheading. It's just, well, I'm probably boring you now going on about my deadheading of my roses. So let's get back to talking about monocots and dicots. A monocot is a seed with 1 cotyledon. The flower parts are in multiples of 3. The leaves are parallel veins, and they have vascular bundles of stem scattered, and vascular cambium is absent. For dicots, they have 2 cotyledons, and that's really what we're talking about here is the amount of cotyledons. Mono means 1, so they have 1 cotyledon. Di, the prefix, means 2, so 2 cotyledons. Flower parts are in 4s and 5s, so you're going to count your petals. And I'm talking about, a whole flower, not one that maybe lost a petal or one that's dying off and you can't really find the petals anymore on those flowers. So you want a healthy flower, that's what you're going to be counting. If it comes in parts of 3, that's a monocot. If you see 4s or 5s, that's a dicot. It has a leaf with a distinct network of primary veins, a vascular bundle of stem and a ring, and vascular cambium is going to be present here. So this is just to give you an idea kind of what this looks like. When we look at the seed, it's very similar. You'd have to crack the seed open to really get an idea of whether it's a mono or a di. Roots, it just has one little thing in the middle here. That's where everything happens. On a dicot, it has stuff all around it and in the middle. The stem, you can see there's distinct regions here. This one is kind of scattered all throughout. The leaves are going to form veins, so they run in straight lines. For the parallel ones, with a vein, it kind of would look, like your hand or your arm. It's just a mess everywhere. And when you're counting your flower parts, you'd count your petals, 3, 6, 9, those are all monocots. If it's a group of 4, 8, 12, that's a dicot, and also 5s, 10, 15, that is going to be a dicot as well. Dicots are 3/4 of all flowering plants. It includes a lot of annual plants, all of the flowering trees, and the shrubs. Monocots are primarily herbaceous, and they're believed to have evolved from very primitive dicots. These are going to be your bulb plants like lilies, grasses, and your palms. Even without a vascular cambium, monocots can become large through a primary thickening process that occurs just below the apical meristem. So this is looking at its root. So the root is basically going to grow outward. It's going to get wider. Biologists classify organisms according to their evolutionary relationships. So monocots are still in one single group. Dicots have since been divided into several different groups because there's so many dicots, they had to find some way to shorten it and group it up more. And although the dicot classification is no longer used, if you look in taxonomy, you won't find the clade of a dicot, but we still talk about it in class, or if you become a botanist or go to school for botany, they will still discuss dicots versus monocots because it is an easy way to describe the structure of the plant. So there are 5 major clades when we go through taxonomy. And you probably hit one of these whenever you're doing one of your projects. We have the ambarellas, which means that there's a spiral arrangement of floral parts. The water lilies, they're a very old group that ranges from lilies that are teeny tiny, 1 centimeter across, to extremely large, showy lilies. I love lilies. I have day lilies and I have just stalk lilies all throughout my flower beds. Magnolids cover a wide variety of plants from small plain flowers to dinner-sized plate magnolias. Monocots are about 20% of all angiosperms, and the eudicots are 75% of angiosperms. And scientists are still working out how all these angiosperm clades are related to one another. And that is it for our notes on angiosperms. Alrighty. I will talk to you guys later.